Hi all, hope we've been staying safe and well. Today we're going to have a look at another of the Inspector Calls theme style questions. However, we're going to look at one that was from a few years ago, which was a bit unusual in its sort of style and what it was actually asking us to look at. The question asked you to consider the role of the inspector and the significance of the crime genre for the play as a whole. So we've got to consider a few things. We've got to consider thematically what's going on. We've got to consider almost character as well, because we're focusing on the inspector in this particular detail, and the fact that the form of a crime narrative and why that is a significant thing for Priestley to choose and why he chose that particular form. So within this video, I'm going to go through an essay plan with you. We're going to see how I would break it apart into its component points and the different ideas and bits of evidence that I would be using to elaborate upon this. Hope it's really useful, and obviously there's a couple of tasks for you to try it at the end. Okay, so the first thing we really need to think about when we're planning this response is, what are we actually looking for? So initially, when I was planning this question, I was thinking about the crime form and having a look at what the crime form means to me as an audience member and what the significance of that is. So we're looking at things like how do the characters behave, what are the sort of genre conventions of a crime drama. There's a victim, there's an investigator, there's a criminal, and how has that Priestley been utilising these ideas to create his narrative. So within this, I'm looking at particularly the use of the inspector and how he conforms to a traditional crime drama, and then occasionally how he goes against those traditional principles. So within this essay plan, there are lots of points considering the inspector, and I'll try and elaborate a little bit on them about how that I feel that fits in with the crime genre. Okay, the first thing I've looked at for my introduction is this idea that the inspector is Priestley's voice within the play. So if we're looking at this as an opening introduction, we want to consider the fact that the play is didactic, that it is a play that is trying to teach the audience a message that the playwright Priestley would like to get across. We also got this idea about it's to do with morality, about values and beliefs. So this is starting to draw in this idea of a crime genre, because crime texts often talk about morals, values and beliefs, and the ideologies that Priestley's presenting. Now we know he's a socialist, and this idea that he's trying to impose this socialist message on us through the crime that occurs in the play, the crime of Eva Smith's neglect and her suicide. So in my introduction, what I'll be trying to do is trying to introduce the idea that within this crime text, within this the play that we have here, Priestley is trying to impose his values, his message, his morality and his beliefs on us as an audience through the crime, in inverted commas, that occurs. Okay, the first of the ideas that I'd like to explore is looking at the inspector and his role within the play, and the traditional role within a crime story as the detective, as the most powerful character within the play. We think of something like Sherlock Holmes or other crime dramas. The detective is powerful. They have a sense of power and a sense of purpose. So within Priestley's play, we have this presented quite clearly, that the inspector is a powerful character and someone who holds a lot of status within the room, if not social status, then actual physical power and presence. So we have things like stage direction, which I put in brackets here, taking charge masterfully. The fact that the inspector can charge the situation and takes control of it, it shows his power. The fact that he offers imperative commands like "listen to me" is a really significant aspect. The fact that he can command an audience to listen to him straight away. The fact he can make declarative sentences like "I don't play golf," "I can't agree there," and he's self-assured enough to be able to do that to the characters who are of a higher social status to him, and he has the power to be able to do that. in his stage direction, he is described as massiveness, solidity, and purpose, which is the idea of this. He's almost like a force of nature to be reckoned with. So the Priestley's presented to us a traditional crime story characteristic, with the detective as a powerful, strong presence in the room to investigate the crime. Okay, the second crime drama characteristic that I've gone for is the fact that the inspector moves methodically from one character or one part of the story to the next, and he takes each component part in turn and breaks it down. So in the play we see this as a series of interviews, starting with Mr. Burling, then Sheila, then Gerald, then Mrs. Burling, then Eric, and we see this methodical movement from one character to the next and exploring them in depth, and the narrative slowly builds up from that. So a traditional crime story would have that, where you see lots of interviews or lots of clues being put together into a full narrative. So the inspector even recognises this. He uses quotations such as one line of inquiry at a time. We're looking at, introspectively looking at one person and looking at their role and their responsibility in Eva Smith's death, and we're going to explore that. He describes a chain of events, and what the inspector's trying to do is to piece together the elements of this narrative so that we have the story coming together from all these component bits of evidence. He describes things like the fact that Eva Smith kept a sort of diary. We have the photograph, these pieces of evidence that he moves methodically through, the fact that he won't let the other characters see the photograph before it is their turn to be interrogated. Sheila even acknowledges this and said it's why he's finished with you and he's moving on to the next person. So we have this methodical line of inquiry and piecing together of evidence to put together the full story. Okay, the next of the crime characteristics that I've gone for is the fact that the inspector can spot lies and he can force confessions. So he is masterful in spotting when someone is trying to be deceptive or elusive or to not tell the whole truth, and he can actually, through his presence, get characters to confess behaviours that they might not have wished to previously. So the play is full of short phrases like, "Are you sure?" about that, and is that what happened? The inspector encourages people to talk, and if you've ever seen a crime story, that's a characteristic of a good detective. Will be able to encourage their the person that they're interrogating or interviewing to talk and to tell them more. After the inspector's left, we see how the characters discuss how he managed to get the information from them. Sheila says, "I won't forget the way he made me feel." The fact that the inspector's behaviours and his way of interrogating and speaking to her made her feel ashamed of herself and made her reflect on her own behaviour. And Mrs. Burling goes the opposite direction and feels hard done by the fact that she's been interrogated. He didn't talk like a police inspector at all. The fact that he's got this masterful way of controlling the situation, of identifying lies and speaking in quite an abrupt and some would consider rude manner to try and get the information from the person who he's interviewing. Okay, as the narrative starts to come to its conclusion, we have another crime drama characteristic in that the inspector passes judgment or passes sentence on the people that he is interviewing. So as we come to the conclusion, we have this abrupt "listen to me" when the characters are all squabbling amongst themselves about who's really to blame. The inspector says, "Each of you helped to kill her." We have this sentence being passed down, the judgment from Priestley via the inspector to the characters, and we have the really powerful exploration of social responsibility, looking at the fact that there are millions and millions and millions of Eva Smiths and John Smiths. We are members of one body, and if man will not learn, they will be taught in fire and blood and anguish. So this final sentence from the inspector is passed down. Throughout the play, we have the inspector judging the characters as he goes on. and asking them to reflect on their own responsibilities. When Mr. Burling says that soon they'll be asking for the earth, he says it is better for them to ask for the earth than to take it. Now, the inspector doesn't remain morally neutral. He challenges the characters and he tries to force them to reflect on their behaviour and to change the way in which they behave. And by the end of the play, we see that some of the characters have absorbed that message and are going to change and modify their behaviours based on what's happened and how the inspector has gone about exploring that with them. Okay, so finally, to conclude this response, I've looked at the idea that Priestley uses the structure of a crime story to explore the guilt and the morals of behaviour. It could be argued that there's only one criminal act that's taken place here, and that's Eric, and the fact is fraud. That's the crime that's taken place. However, Priestley utilises the crime story to explore the darker side of human behaviour and values. The fact that the Burlings and Gerald haven't behaved in an illegal manner doesn't necessarily mean that they haven't behaved in an abhorrent and horrible manner. That's not quite the same thing. So Priestley uses this to show how the way that people are treating each other could be considered criminal behaviour, and he explores that guilt and morality throughout the play and the way of the characters. His big message, of course, being that we are members of one body, we are responsible for each other, this socialist message that he reinforces throughout the play. And what the crime story allows us to do is to explore the characters' perspectives and points of view and see the changes in their behaviour. One of the last things the inspector says is, "I don't think any of you will forget," and then good night as he leaves. So we have this character who has explored and taken apart the evidence and pieced together this narrative of this poor character who's interacted with this entire family, and then taken it completely apart and taken the characters apart in their moralities and their beliefs. Okay, so it's quite an interesting question to consider here, that looking at the idea of the crime story and how the inspector is central to that and his role in a crime narrative. So what I'd like you to do for me is I'm going to put up the essay plan in its complete form, and then I'm going to put up the question, and what I would like you to do is have a go at the plan itself, have a go at your own version of this. Now you can use some of the points and ideas that I've gone for, maybe expand upon the quotations and look at what significant words or ideas you would look at deeper into those quotations. Have a look at it, and then obviously if you want to pause it and take a capture of it, then that's absolutely fine. Stay tuned at the end and we'll have today's film recommendation. Okay, so for today's film recommendation, I've gone for a comedy, a New Zealand comedy, which has been adapted into a TV series, which I'm currently in the middle of, which is What We Do in the Shadows, which follows a house of incompetent vampires and looks at their daily life and how they interact in modern society. It's really, really funny, and I'll definitely check it out. The TV series, which is available on iPlayer, is fantastic. Really, really funny. So until next time, I hope we stay safe. We will be looking at some further character analysis to do with Inspector Calls. Until then, take care.